All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Edsel Ford High School. I'm honored to stand before you on this special day. Let me begin by introducing the color guard who would lead us in the presentation of the colors. From the James Hewer Chapter 267 Color Guard Vietnam Veterans of America, Dave Klein, U.S. Army Vietnam, 1967-1971, rank E5. Nicholas Kaminsky, U.S. Navy Vietnam, 1967, rank Petty Officer, 3rd class, and Edsel Ford graduate. Mike Cardosi, Department of Defense. Francis Leiter, U.S. Army Vietnam, 1971 to 1972, rank Specialist, 4th class. And Tony Gramer, U.S. Army Vietnam, 1968, rank Specialist, 4th class. Please rise. Please remain standing while the Edsel Ford Chamber Choir sings the national anthem. Thank you. Gentlemen, as you leave the stage, we have seats saved for you in the front row to the left, please. I would like to acknowledge some special guests in attendance today. Do we have any representatives of the armed forces, past or present? If we do, please rise. We have two school board members here with us today, Mr. Hussein Berry and Miss Mary Petzlikoff on stage here with us. Thank you to our other special guests, Dr. Glenn Maleyko, Dearborn Public Schools Superintendent, Miss Lisa Lark, former Dearborn Public Schools teacher and Edsel Ford graduate. Special thank you to our featured speaker, Mayor Jack O'Reilly. I would also like to thank Dr. Yusuf Musallam, Executive Director, Mr. Doyle, our trumpeter, Jenna Kobasi, and our Edsel Ford Chamber Choir. Also thank you to Ms. Oren for helping with our instrumentalists and support. Thank you to the Edsel Ford Social Studies Department, who continues to put on this presentation, and its chair, Mr. Mark Golis, and U.S. history teacher, Mr. Dennis Whalen. Thank you for assistance in organizing, and in particular for involving our students today. Thank you also to the administrative support staff at Edsel Ford for assisting Mark and Dennis in the Social Studies Department. It is with great pleasure that I stand before you today representing our school, our community, our faculty, and continuing the tradition of honoring the memories of our fallen Edsel Ford students. My name is Pete Kocianis, and I've been asked to fill in for Principal Casebolt, who is tending to his wife undergoing surgery as we speak. He sends his well wishes and thoughts on this solemn occasion. He wishes he could be here. He just texted me earlier. The purpose of this ceremony is twofold. We are here to honor our past as well as to educate our future. Memorial Day, which is celebrated on the last Monday in May across the United States, is a day reserved to remember the sacrifices made by our service members in defense of our great nation. The tradition of honoring those who lost their lives in service of their nation is an ancient one. Those traditions vary by time, by place, by culture, by custom, by religious affiliation, and by the scope in which those conflicts played on their respective societies. Over 2,500 years ago, the Athenians at Marathon honored their fallen soldiers by burying them in a collective mound at the site of the battle, which was a break from their tradition. The Spartans at Thermopylae chose to remember their fallen by erecting a memorial bronze plaque that simply read, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." Both of those memorials still stand to this day and can be visited. All over the world, monuments, plaques, statues, cemeteries commemorate and memorialize the sacrifices made by individuals, willingly or not, for a cause greater than self. So how do we connect these ancient customs and traditions to our time and place? Although there are different versions of how Memorial Day began in the United States, numerous informal observations began around 1866, coincidentally following the bloodiest and most contested military conflict in American history, the Civil War. It wasn't until 1887 that Congress officially recognized it as a national holiday. Not too long after that, 23 Edsel Ford students gave their lives in service to our country. Like the warriors of old, these individuals had courage, they had pride, they loved their families and their communities. They were ordinary young men who were called upon to participate in a conflict far from home. They were normal people who hoped and loved and dreamed just like all of us. They also share a common bond with our students that are here today, a bond that transcends time, that spans generations, and a bond that unites our past with our present. This bond is rooted in the shared experiences that you, our students, had with them in this very school. Like you, they walked in these same halls, and like you, they played on these same fields. Like you, they learned in these very same classrooms. And like you, they wore the black and white, and they were proud Thunderbirds. Their names appear on a beautiful but unassuming plaque that sits outside of the main office that we walk by every single day. Yet, they are no longer with us. So, as the program proceeds today, please listen carefully to the words and the stories that you will hear. You are here today to honor their memory and to learn your history. I ask that you take some time this weekend to think about what your fellow Thunderbirds were asked to do, the sacrifices they made, the lives they did not get to live so we could live in a free society. Also, please take some time this weekend to think about the thousands of servicemen and women who have also sacrificed their lives for our country, and for those who, as we speak now, have chosen to put their lives on the line so that we may live in peace. May their memories be eternal. Thank you. I would like to now introduce Superintendent of Dearborn Public Schools, Dr. Glenn Maleyko, to say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kochianis. I appreciate the ability to be here today. I wanted to just mention, too, that it's been a great week of ceremonies that we've had, and I know these individuals have been with me all week. We now have a ceremony that we're running at all three of the major high schools, and we continue to do that annually to represent those who lost their lives for the military. So, again, that's a real positive, and we continue to do that, and I thank all the guests for being here today. So time has an interesting way of influencing our behaviors, both good and bad. No one wakes up and decides to gain 20 or 30 pounds. Rather, over time, we tend to pick up bad habits like eating the wrong food or not exercising. The same can be said when it comes to important celebrations that commemorate significant events and people in our history. We have allowed time to turn these important days into an excuse for a good sale or possibly a marketing gimmick. That's unfortunate, especially when we are talking about a day as important as Memorial Day. It's also kind of ironic because Memorial Day didn't begin with any big fanfare or official declaration. It was started by people who would gather to place the flowers on graves and honor those military personnel who died during the Civil War. They called it Decoration Day, and it was a good habit that caught on, and over time it kept growing. After World War I, the holiday evolved to commemorate American military personnel who died in all wars, and then much later, the day became known as what it is today, Memorial Day, or I look at it this week as Memorial Week, and was moved to the last Monday in May. In November, we have a day to pay tribute and thank our veterans, those who have served in the armed forces, but today is different. Today we pause with reverence as this day honors those who paid the ultimate sacrifice and gave their life while serving in the military. We owe it to those fallen heroes and their families to never forget the true meaning of Memorial Day. Many who died while serving in the armed forces were at the very start of their life. They had plans, dreams, and hopes. They were looking forward to a future filled with friends and family. They were the next police officers, scientists, engineers, teachers. My own grandfather, who passed away in 2012, served in the U.S. Navy in the Pacific Ocean off the shores of Japan in World War II. I heard many stories from my grandfather, who was very proud that he served his country. I'm fortunate I was able to hear those stories firsthand, directly from my grandfather. On Memorial Day, we must also remember the families who were never able to hear those stories firsthand because their loved one was lost while serving their country. Let them know that their family member is appreciated and remembered. Let them know that the ultimate sacrifice, the price that was paid for our continued freedom, will never be forgotten. This Memorial Day weekend, enjoy the day off. Spend time with friends and family. Grab a blanket or a lawn chair and make your way to the big parade. It is a great parade. But most important, continue the good habit and take the time to remember the mothers, daughters, sons, and fathers who served our country and gave their life defending our freedom. Thank you, and may God bless our fallen, our veterans, our military, and this great nation, the United States of America. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Maleyko. Now the Edsel Ford Chamber Choir will perform If You're Reading This.
Looks like I only got a one-way ticket over here. I sure wish I could give you one last kiss. And war was just a game we played when we were kids. Well, I'm laying down my gun. I'm hanging up my boots. I'm up here with God, and we're both watching over you. that open field right on the edge of town. And oh, my soul is where my mama always prayed that it would go. If you're reading this, I'm already home. If you're reading this, halfway around the world, but I won't be there to see the birth of our little girl. Hope she looks like you, hope she fights like me, stands up for the innocent and the weak. I'm laying down my gun, I'm hanging up my boots. Tell Dad I don't regret that I followed in his shoes. So lay me down in that open field right on the edge of town. And oh, my soul is where my mama always prayed that it would go. If you're reading this, I'm already home. If you're reading this, there's gonna come a day where you'll move on and find someone else, and that's okay. Just remember this, I'm in a bad place, where soldiers live in peace and angels sing amazing grace. So take me down in that open field out on the edge of town. And oh, my soul is where my mama always prayed that it would go. If you're reading this, I'm already home.
Thank you, gentlemen. Please let me introduce the leader of this fine city of Dearborn, our mayor, Mr. Jack O'Reilly.
Good morning. That beautiful song that was so well done tells the whole story. We're looking at honoring those people who didn't necessarily want to go, but went because it was their duty. And they went to war because their obligation, their goal, was to protect democracy. And they knew when they left that there were a chance they wouldn't come back. And they were not far removed from where you are now in terms of what they were doing. You'll see many of them were recently out of just getting out of school, just beginning to form what they were going to do for the rest of their lives. But they interrupted that process because they felt a duty to go and serve our country. And that's what we're here about. And Edsel Ford has done an outstanding job over the years of not forgetting, because that's the least we can do for those persons. For me, they were my friends and colleagues from school in that era that that we're going to be talking about. And they were just like you, like all of us. They were teenagers in many cases, or just past teen. They were looking at a life ahead. They were looking at things that they might do. They were exploring things. And all of that was put aside as they went over because the country said, we have a duty, we have something we have to achieve, and we need you to work with us to achieve it. And that's protection of democracy. So it's so important. You know, in Dearborn, we're at 93. We've had a parade continuously for 93 years. We have been honoring our veterans at Memorial Day, but it's one time. And all I'm saying is, if you really want to honor them, you know, do it through your actions, through what you do, through what we do for their colleagues, because not only are we going to celebrate people who made the ultimate sacrifice, that they gave up their lives, but there are veterans who've come back from wars, including the Vietnam War and others, that are carrying other burdens. Agent Orange, which was something that was used, has generations of people in a family exposed to that. I mean, it's something that they brought home, but through their having children and so on, we have a real crisis for those individuals. So maybe, yes, they didn't die overseas. They're not part of what we're talking about today. But if we're going to honor their colleagues, we need to also make sure that we're taking care of the other soldiers who went over, because we're not doing a good job. And these are amazingly, I mean, think about it. If you have children and then you find out that Agent Orange is passed through to the children and passed through to the other children, so that they may have health issues directly related to that. This is really the important thing. We're all in this together. We're all members of the United States. We're all people and members of communities, and we have to look after each other. And so, again, this is a day to pause, to recognize that there are things and duties that we have as members of this great society, and we have to live up to them. Some will go to war. Others will be at home, but they still need to be supportive. And that was one of the things. The other thing that we talk about with this war was that there wasn't the acceptance at home. There wasn't the support necessarily. It was very contentious. But that doesn't change. It doesn't matter how you felt about the war. The important thing is that these people said, I'm going to do my duty. And we need to honor them for that. And we need to honor them not only today, but in what we do to make sure that others are taken care of, that we're treating veterans who go and serve well, and that we're looking out for their welfare, and we're making sure that they don't suffer without any reason when they come back home simply because we're not paying attention, that we're not making them a priority. So again, you're going off. This is the time of year for this event is kind of hard in terms of you have so many things going on in your lives, so much excitement as school ends, and many of you are looking at where you're going next and what you're going to do. But we do need to not just today, but always be mindful of others who've made sacrifices for us, who've made our lives possible, and make sure that we're paying attention and trying to address concerns that are vital to them. And that's what I'd like you to leave with today, is that commitment that we're all in this together, and we all need to make sure that we don't fail to address the needs of our colleagues who have done so much for us. And I thank you very much for being here and being attentive.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. We'd like now to begin our flower ceremony and honor our heroes. Please let me welcome back and introduce to you Ms. Lisa Lark, Edsel Ford graduate, former Edsel Ford teacher, published author of the book entitled All They Left Behind, Legacies of Men and Women on the Wall. Please welcome Ms. Lark.
Born on New Year's Eve, Dennis Stancroft had two younger siblings. They lived on Columbia Street. While at Edsel, he was an excellent swimmer. He enlisted in the Marine Corps with two of his friends and arrived in Vietnam in the end of 1965. He was killed on Christmas Eve at the age of 20, the first young man from Dearborn to lose his life in Vietnam. David Terwilliger and his family lived on Columbia Street. He attended Whitmore, Bowles, and Smith before coming to Edsel. He was on the wrestling team, liked to draw, and could often be found designing cars. He enlisted in the Army and was sent to Vietnam. He had been there only a few weeks when he was killed in combat. He was 19 years old. Rudy Jackie Matt grew up with his two sisters and brother. After graduating from Edsel, he was apprenticed as a rigger. He loved taking things apart and was very mechanical. He was drafted into the Army in 1965. He served as a helicopter crewman and was proud of his job protecting wounded soldiers while they were being transported for care. He died in a helicopter crash at the age of 21. Earl Smith lived in Springwells Park and was a Boy Scout. He attended Stout and Edsel. He joined the Army because he wanted to do something important with his life. He arrived in Vietnam in 1966 and was serving as a medic, voluntarily extending his time in the field to stay with his unit. He was killed by small arms fire while assisting soldiers in combat near the Cambodian border. He was 19 years old. Bruce Reynolds was born in 1946. He grew up on Gertrude Street and had two brothers. He enlisted in the Navy and was undergoing training to become an air traffic controller. In 1966, he had returned home to the Detroit area on leave when he was killed in a car accident. He left behind a wife and son. He was 19 years old. John Cochran and his four sisters grew up on Roosevelt Street. His father was a pastor. While at Edsel, he was a star on the football and track teams. After graduation, he attended Taylor University in Indiana and enlisted in the Army in 1962. He was sent to Vietnam in 1966. He was days away from meeting his wife in Hawaii for rest and relaxation when he was struck down by a sniper's bullet. He was 25 years old. Alan Cartoonan lived on Alice Street. He joined the Navy in 1965 and was stationed on the USS Yellowstone in Florida as a fireman. He died in a car accident in November of 1966. He was 19 years old and engaged to be married. George Siegwald II was called Butch by his family. He attended Whitmore, Bowles, and Smith and swam the backstroke on the Edsel Ford swim team. He wanted to be a mechanic. In 1963, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps with his friend Dennis Stancroft. He was training and was killed in a car accident. He was 21 years old. Robert Yoakum Jr. was called Chip by his family. He was charming and had a great personality. While at Edsel, he participated in school plays on this very stage and was a goalie on a local community hockey team. After high school, he attended Michigan State and Northern Michigan. He was engaged to be married. He enlisted in the Army and was commissioned as a lieutenant. He had just received his orders to go to Vietnam when he died in a motorcycle accident. He was 21 years old. Henry Fugit and his family lived on Alice Street. He was described by his friends as quiet and likable. He was drafted after graduating from Edsel and arrived in Vietnam in June of 1967. He served as a radio telephone operator and had just been transferred to a weapons platoon when he was killed by a sniper in October. He was 19 years old. William Schmaltz III was born in 1947. He grew up in Dearborn with his parents and brother. He was home on leave visiting his grandmother when he was killed in a car accident. He was 20 years old. David Brown was the oldest of 3 boys, and his family grew up on Linden Street. He loved sports and was a Cub Scout and Boy Scout. After graduation, he attended Henry Ford Community College and worked at a gas station. He was drafted in May of 1968. He arrived in Vietnam in April of '69. Less than 3 months later, he was killed in combat at the age of 20. Michael Jangowski and his family lived on Roosevelt. After graduating from Edsel, Mike joined the Army. Due to a heart condition that he suffered as a child, he was unable to go to Vietnam. He served in Korea and Japan and was on leave in New Mexico when he passed away. He was 20 years old. Don Rowley had 4 sisters, and they lived on Edison Street. He was on the swim team at Edsel and was a kind and funny young man. His friends still remember his jokes. He was drafted in May of 1969 and sent to Vietnam in April of 1970. While serving in Vietnam, he realized he did not believe in the idea of war and began writing letters to Dearborn's Mayor Orville Hubbard to ask to be granted conscientious objector status. One letter was dated June 23rd, 1970. He died the same day. He was 21 years old. David Antal grew up on Linden Street with his parents and younger sister. He loved the outdoors and often went on hunting and fishing trips with his father. He was a class clown and always made his friends laugh. After graduation, he worked at Great Lakes Seal and went to Henry Ford Community College. He was drafted in 1966. He was serving as a crew chief on a Huey helicopter, flying more than 25 combat missions. He was killed in a helicopter accident in 1967, just 9 days before he turned 21. James Stubblefield lived with his grandmother on Queen Street. He enlisted in the Air Force after graduation and was trained as a weapons mechanic. He arrived in Vietnam in December of 1965, and he had served a full tour of nearly a year when he was killed in a plane crash. He was 23 years old. Eddie Bird was one of 4 kids. He attended Nowlin and Smith before coming to Edsel. He left Edsel in the 11th grade and joined the Navy. He had been stationed around the world and was serving on the USS Spear based in Norfolk, Virginia. He was killed in a car accident in January of 1972. He left behind a wife and 3 sons and was 28 years old. Alan Hosnettel lived with his family on Olmsted. He was a star swimmer while at Edsel and went to Michigan State after graduation. His father became ill in 1965, and Alan returned to Dearborn to run the family business. He was drafted almost immediately after returning home and was sent to Vietnam in July of 1968. He was killed in March of 1969 in combat. His father died shortly after. He was 23 years old. Michael Niezgoda grew up on Olmsted. He excelled in shop class and loved his 1966 Mercury Comet Caliente. He joined the Army on the buddy system with 2 of his friends, Charles Hanselman and Doug McElroy, who are honored here with him today. He arrived in December of 1967 and was killed in combat when his company was ambushed by enemy in September of 1968, just 10 days after he turned 20. Jerry Wayne Clark was one of 8 children. He grew up on Bailey Street. After graduation, he got an associate's degree from Henry Ford. Jerry was a talented musician and had taught himself to play drums and clarinet and had started a band with several of his friends. He was drafted in 1967 and arrived in Vietnam in 1968. He had only been in country a few months when he was killed in combat at the age of 22. Chuck Hanselman was an only child and grew up on McKinley. He ran track well at Edsel. He had strong character and always stood up for the underdog. He loved Motown music. He joined on the buddy system with Mike Niezgoda and Doug McElroy. They spent Thanksgiving together before they went to Vietnam in December of 1967. He arrived in Vietnam just before Christmas and was killed in action on January 10th. He was 19 years old. Doug McElroy was an only child and lived on Lincoln Street. He was an excellent football and basketball player while at Edsel. He joined the Army with Mike Niesgoda and Chuck Hanselman in July of '67, arrived in Vietnam in December of 1967, and was killed in action less than a month later, the first of his 3 friends to die. He was 19 years old. Randy had 4 siblings, and his family lived on Chestnut. He loved nature and wanted to be a conservation officer in the national parks. He joined the Army while at Edsel and arrived in Vietnam in July of 1967. He served as a scout dog handler in a K-9 unit. He was on a search and destroy mission, reporting enemy positions when he triggered a booby trap and was killed. He was 19 years old. Thank you. I would like you all to take a moment and look at these 23 empty chairs in the front of the auditorium. These were young men just like you and just like me. They left behind families and friends who still miss them to this day. I leave you with the words of Mrs. Anna Antal, who lost her only son. I am so happy that people still remember my David. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lark. In honor of our soldiers and their sacrifices, we will now play taps. Please remain standing as we retire the colors.
On guard, mark the place. On guard. Right. Retreat. Flag. Order. On. Live.
This concludes our program for today. Thank you all for attending.
I know you did pretty quick. I got there.